All right, I think give us a second to get online figured out and we can get started. Good morning, Flavia. I can see you. I don't know if we can hear you quite yet or not.
Hey, Christy. Good morning, everyone.
We can hear you just great, actually. All right, I'll go ahead and call us to order. We are small and mighty today, and I think we can be pretty efficient and quick. We'll go ahead and get started. I guess we need to probably call the roll.
Happy to do so, Madam Chairman. So calling for roll. Commissioner Pope.
Here.
Commissioner Wallace.
Here.
Commissioner Naves.
Here.
Commissioner Reville.
Excused.
Commissioner Meyer.
Excused.
Commissioner Gordon.
Excused.
And Chairman Racines.
Here.
Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
By a hair.
Excellent. If you wouldn't mind, I'll do my standard check-ins and disclaimers here.
Proceed.
So checking in quickly with our tech team. We are live now at the practice room. We are recording. We have transcriptions and closed captions running.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And it looks like everyone is in speaker mode. So thank you as always, Mr. Erickson. And then for our announcements, again, agendas and sign-in sheets are in the back of the room. So if you are here in person, please do fill those out. We certainly appreciate it. And our disclaimer, key decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. At this time, no blockchain has been selected for deployment of Wyoming Stable Tokens, and no Wyoming Stable Tokens have been issued. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, the governor, or a majority vote of the commission. Information outside of these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. At this time, these are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming legislature website at wyoleg.gov, and our social media channels with the @WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. And with all that being said, Commissioner Pope, through the chair, I'd like to throw over to you for an introduction.
Thank you, Director Apollo. I would like to officially report that Jennifer Gelati from Concordia College in Nebraska is with us today as an official guest of mine. She is a second-year intern here, has completed her bachelor's requirements, graduated with that, and is now beginning to enter her master's program at Concordia. Jennifer, welcome, and we hope that we do not bore you to death. But I would also like to note that 3 out of the 4 commissioners present are either accountants or ex-accountants. And therefore, if anything goes wrong today, it is not only a black mark on the commission, but it is a black mark on the profession.
And the executive director.
Oh,
right?
The executive director. Anyway, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to introduce Jennifer and also add my little bit of trivia to that.
Absolutely. Welcome, Jennifer. Thanks for being here. Okay, I think we have taken to the habit of reviewing and approving the agenda. So everyone has that in front of you. I don't have any changes, and if no one else has any changes to the agenda, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we have an agenda. I think our first action item is we have the minutes from our prior meeting on June 27th, 2024. Does anyone have any changes or corrections to that set of minutes? Anthony, or Director, not that this is a huge deal, but I would note that I chaired that meeting. So you might swap me and, not that I care, but I think that the governor is still listed as chairman of that meeting.
So, Madam Chairman.
Oh, that's the, gotcha. Okay, that's the statutory. Never mind.
Correct. And then throughout the document, you'll see
Okay. Perfect. As he is in the statute. Gotcha. Okay. All right. If there's no other changes, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes from June 27th, 2024.
So moved.
Is there-
Second.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Moving on to the monthly budget review.
I get my microphone here. Thank you, Madam Chairman. So we'll do our standard budget review first. No eyebrow raisers here. And then we'll go through a little bit extra detail around the budget, the biennial fiscal year rollover from BFY '23 to BFY '25. So if you're looking at the first of the longer pages in front of you here in the room, for those online, it would be the 016.6.B or A, I believe. It's one referred to as monthly budget summary. So you could see in that file that our main driver of expenses, as usual, is salaries and benefits, and that's been consistent pretty much the entirety of 2024. So no surprises there. We do have some charges for out-of-state travel for both myself and my trip to Washington, D.C. for the D.C. Blockchain Summit and for a meeting with the Wyoming congressional delegation. And also we have some fees in here for Commissioner Navis's travel in May for our May 23rd meeting and also the overlap with the Select Committee. And we did highlight those in the prior discussion, that those were anticipated charges. So again, no surprises. We do have some miscellaneous expenses pertaining to small incidentals and our recurring software as a service charges. And we also have our standard telecom charges for the month as well. So in terms of our monthly expenses, we're in line with our averages at about $16,500. And for the entirety of the biennial fiscal year 2023, ending on June 30th, 2024, we have spent $233,560 of our $500,000 allocation as provided by statute. So again, as we've been tracking, we've come in under 50% of the initial allocation. And that leaves us with $266,439 and change as a surplus, which is considered to be unencumbered or unobligated, and I'll get back to that concept in a second. But is there any questions on the big picture items in the summary?
Any questions for the director?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And just in case we don't typically spend much time reviewing the detail sheet, we won't do it today either. But if you are looking for any additional context regarding some of these charges, they are enumerated in that detail sheet. So with that being said, I would turn us over to the third longer piece of paper you have in front of you. And for those online, this would be the BFY rollover rec. So this is the math that was done to make sure we had the correct amounts deposited in our account for the biennial fiscal year of 2025, which begins on July 1st, so a few weeks back, and ends on June 30th of 2026. So as a quick recap regarding the way our budget works per the budget bill, we're going to net out with $5.8 million accessible to us, and that's our spending authority. However, that is not a direct distribution. What was done was we essentially took 5.8 million from the general fund. We subtracted the surplus, or again, the unobligated or unencumbered funds from that amount. And the Department of Administration information calculated that to be $5,516,105.65 was the number that was provided to me on July 1st to make sure that was in line with our expectations. So at that time, I had not received the 6/30 budget summary yet. So what I did was took the May 31st numbers that we had approved, removed all of our standard monthly expenses, removed the known travel items for myself and Commissioner Naves, removed all of our SaaS services, which were encumbered by A&I, and we came pretty close to the mark on the number that was provided to us. So we are in agreement on that. It was less than 0.03% of difference from the budget that we were provided in the initial allocation. So I would consider that to be immaterial and under $150. So that was fine by me. And then what we did was re-reconciled these numbers after we did receive the 6/30 numbers from A&I. And again, we came right back on target with the initial set of initial data set. So net $5,516,105.65 has been deposited in our account, is now available to the commission. Again, the expectation is that'll be used for salaries and benefits for the team, as well as engaging the vendors who are going to help us build out the stable token offering. And one of the things I've calculated here at the bottom is that 5.8 million plus the expenses from BFY 23, that nets us out to $6,033,963 even. And that is the total potential repayment that the commission would owe, for lack of a better term, to the general fund to repay the dollars that we've taken out of the general fund. And if you recall the cascade that we have in terms of our obligations per statute, we repay those dollars first, then we establish our 102% notional buffer over the amount of stable tokens outstanding. Then we pay for the operational expenses of the agency and any R&D allocations we want to have. I believe it's called retained earnings in the statute, but that's the thrust of it. And then the dollars left over after that waterfall cascades would end up in the school foundation fund, again, part of the general fund, and that's intended to be a quarterly distribution. So I know it's a lot of detail. We've talked about this over the last several months, and we're where we need to be, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that commissioners may have.
Go ahead.
Just an observation, Director Apollo. I think, for the record, I want to make sure that the order of repayment is correct, because you said first that we repay the general fund and then establish the 102%. In my thoughts, I would think it would be establish the 102%, then begin repayment to the fund, because we need to maintain redemption funds first, and make sure that those are guaranteed first, and then begin the repayment process. Am I correct or am I wrong?
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, I do believe that the dollars get repaid to the general fund first. I'm just double checking on this. I do believe that was in statute and some of the documents we've generated to date. That being said, one thing we've touched on in the past is, while we do have a statutory obligation to work our way up to 102%, we are not in a situation where we need to snap our fingers and create that 102% from day one, right? We can't have an expectation that we're going to have that surplus capital until we actually have time to hold on to the underlying reserves and generate the interest income off the treasuries and the repurchase agreements.
Thank you, Director. Okay, I think that we may need to discuss that part further, because I believe the intent was probably to develop that cushion first. If the statute is incorrect, then I would love to discuss that further and maybe take a look at that, because I think, and this is my opinion now as an accountant, we have to have that buffer in place for market value fluctuations and things like that before we can begin repayment using the funds allocated or using the income from the sales or from the treasuries. So thank you. I don't know that this is something that will resolve right now, but I think this is something that we need to address.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, and again, thank you for your commentary. Certainly happy to explore this with you. It's section 40-31-106 in our statute. To your point, the complexity here is subsection B of that section is the one that talks about the notional amount and the reserve requirement. However, subsection C states that is the section that creates the fund itself that receives the capital, and the first Romanette there is to pay for the operational costs of this act. So take that as you will. And then I think if we wanted to reevaluate some of this, one of the things that I would put forward, and this is a longer tail discussion than from where we are right now, we're still talking design, but if this project does create a decent amount of revenue for the state, we may want to broaden the horizon of sections of the general fund that we could contribute to beyond the school fund.
Go ahead.
I thank you, Madam Chair. I agree on all of that, and I think that when looking at the order of repayment, or the order of use of the funds, I guess that's what I'll call the section, the order of use. It does bear clarification at the very least, and so I think we can set that aside. I think the next select committee meeting is in September.
Yes.
And I would love for us to have an extended discussion on this, possibly at our next meeting here.
Absolutely. And Madam Chairman, I'll also note that Commissioner Navas does have her hand up. I don't know if you're able to see that from.
Sure, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you. I agree with David's comments, and I think this is something that needs to be discussed. It will probably be addressed as we start the subcommittee work for the procurement and the development of the reserve management process and the policies. But it is critical because if you think of the word operational, it can be considered many different things. I wasn't part of the drafting group, and I don't know what operational means, but I think to David's point, it warrants clarity. If you are to repay the debt to the state first before having the surplus, it may be likely that you just don't get to that surplus at all. And then you don't have that buffer to be able to adjust to market fluctuations. So something to be discussed as the reserve management policy is drafted as part of the development process of this token. And I agree with David, it should be raised again in the select committee to ensure obviously that the legislative intent is being met with the development of the token. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Christy.
Yeah, and again, I have this is probably ripe for a longer legal conversation at a later date. And I think there's the nuances between the two accounts and this commission's ability to set up rules as to how often, what operations mean and how often we would transfer to that. But I think those conversations will come in due time, and hopefully they sneak up on us because we're making so much money. But I do think we probably have a little of time before we delve into that too much. But I think that's a very good point. Okay, any other questions on the budget summary or the rollover? I mean, however you slice it, we basically start over fresh with 5.8 million at the beginning of this month.
That's correct, Madam Chairman.
Great. Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So The next several items on our list will also be pretty quick, and I think that expediency will be the theme of today's discussion. So one of the other documents you have with you is the monthly updated contact list. Again, this is the roster of people I've been speaking with regarding the project and the ability to discuss what it is we're building with both vendors and subject matter advisors. So again, we just kind of, there's lots of details in there that we give to you for your own perusal. One of the things I'll mention is, again, I've been in touch with over 500 people at this point. Those numbers are actually, the numbers that are on that spreadsheet in the back, they're actually a little lower than last month for the individuals contacted. That's because I've removed the cohort of names in there that I was in discussions with regarding the roles that we're pursuing. So those are now in a separate tracker. So there might be a little bit of a delta there, but again, we've still talked to over 500 people across 250 organizations functionally since Thanksgiving about this project. Any questions on the contact list? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and proceed with a quick update from the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Innovation, and Digital Technology. So their last meeting was July 1st and 2nd. I had the opportunity to present a brief update the morning of July 2nd. Again, I say brief because we had a update with them in late May, on May 20th. That had been 6 months since the last update we provided them. So that was a much more robust discussion. This was more of a quick update focused on our progress with recruitment, getting our budget, procurement, and subcommittees. So that was functionally a unilateral discussion from my side to theirs. They did have a couple of questions just to make sure that we were finding the right people as we were going through these processes on both the hiring side and from the vendor side. And they wanted to make sure that we were, talking to teams and individuals who could be qualified to help us. And I think we're there, and that was my response to them. So if anyone missed that discussion, it is on our website. I've even time-stamped it so you could see me and myself talking with the Select Committee, but it was pretty straightforward and no real feedback or criticism from their side. But again, I'd stop and pause there for any questions that commissioners may have.
Any questions?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will continue. So the next item on our list is the Paul Hastings memo. So as we discussed in our last meeting, we engaged Paul Hastings from September through the end of June to work on a memo with us and explore all the different potentialities to look at a Wyoming stable token vis-a-vis securities law, constitutionality, and superimpose some ongoing case law with what it is that we're building. So they've provided a refreshed and updated memo back to us as kind of a closeout. I'm not going to say much about it in this forum because, again, we do have a privileged relationship with them, which I'm not looking to fracture by stating too much. But what I will say is the updates that were made to the memo that was provided do include a consideration of the amendments to the Stable Token Act that were made during the budget session. It does include some feedback and discussions we had alongside the State Treasurer's Office to make sure that their relationship with us in building out this product would be amenable to their current structure. And again, they do have some updated case law in there, as I've highlighted in some of our news updates along the way. This is a rapidly developing sector. And as such, some of the cases that were referenced in November when this was first worked on have already either been settled or closed. And then there's new cases that are being brought forward. So they took a look at all of that and the enforcement actions by various regulatory agencies and layered that on. So I didn't print those out for you because they're fairly robust documents. I'm trying to save some trees, but in the commissioner folder, you have both the clean copy of that and the red line, so you could see where those updates were made. Again, I'll pause for any questions.
Any questions? And I think the gist is was anticipated to and may continue to be somewhat of a living document if we do need to update that in the future. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Madam Chairman. I will continue on. So we'll do the quick news update from my side. As always, there's much moving. We'll again keep today's a bit more expedient. So In terms of the market cap for the stable token industry, we've stayed consistent from our last meeting about 3 weeks ago at about $160 billion. So that's where we continue to be. From the domestic perspective, one of the items we've talked about in several meetings at this point is Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 through the SEC. This is a piece of guidance that has made it difficult for large financial institutions and banks to actually custody digital assets because it creates a pretty big gap on their balance sheet they need to fill to do so. And about 2 months ago, I believe, the House voted to repeal SAB 121. The Biden administration came out and said they would veto it regardless. The Senate then voted on it. They also voted to overturn the guidance. And then there was a bit of a waiting period. Then it was eventually overturned by the Biden administration. More recently than our last conversation, both branches of the legislature came back to potentially overturn the veto to repeal the bulletin, but that failed. So SAB 121 currently stands where it is.
Which is not in force.
So SAB 121 is in
Is in
force.
force. Okay, sorry,
It's-
that was a lot of.
Yes, I've become aware of that. What I will say is it's unclear how much that may impact us because by virtue of having a stable token, we are de facto backing it. That's my own personal opinion. That's not a legal opinion. Commissioner Novus does not have her hand up, so it doesn't look like I'm being corrected too soon. But the thought here is if a bank was going to hold something like Bitcoin or Ether, they might need to back it with dollars or elsewhere on their balance sheet. For us, we're going to have those dollars or reserves functionally there. So TBD, but one of the many things that we're monitoring happening at the federal level. And speaking of which, I won't say much about this either because I'm not looking to make this a political conversation, but cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital assets are becoming much more of a hot button item during the upcoming election cycle. Donald Trump recently announced that J.D. Vance will be his vice presidential pick. J.D. Vance is someone who is known to be a proponent of cryptocurrency in the blockchain industry from both his own personal holdings and his investments in his time as a venture capitalist. So this is something we're just kind of monitoring, and we're continuing to keep a pulse on the tone in DC regarding this industry as a whole. From the international perspective, there's a couple things that are hot off the presses, so I'm gonna make sure I get these right. But one is the Bank of International Settlements has put forth some guidance over the last several years around this industry, some of which we've highlighted before. They put out a piece of guidance yesterday that I've candidly not gone through quite yet, because this was late last night, but it does seem like their current guidance would back the use of permissioned blockchains and not public blockchains for any kind of utilization by financial institutions. And again, Commissioner Naves, if you're ahead of me on this one, I would invite you to tag in. The other piece of news is, again, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority also put forth some documentation last night, not formal guidance or legislation, but just the collation of the feedback they've received to date on stable tokens to be used in their own kind of geographical area. So again, Commissioner Naves, if you've dug into any more of that than I have in the last 10 hours, I would welcome any additional input. Otherwise, I'm happy to kind of follow up on any of these threads with the commission at our next discussion.
Nothing else at this time, Anthony. It's all in development, so we should update the commission at the next meeting.
Happy to do so. And then finally, things on the incumbent side. So one is we've seen pretty robust growth in PayPal's PYUSD offering. They've migrated to Solana, or they've launched on Solana as one of the newer offerings. I did highlight that in the last discussion as something that we are looking into, which is confidential transfers, which is the ability to obfuscate the amount of value going back and forth between two parties. This is kind of one of these privacy forward solutions that we may want to look into, where that would be obfuscated on the public chain, but we as the issuers of the token would have the necessary insights into those transactions that we would need to make sure we stay in compliance. So as a result of that, they've seen some pretty significant growth for the PYUSD stable token that they've issued, and that's about $600 million in market cap now. It's a pretty big jump from where it was when we last spoke. And then also from Circle's perspective, they have become the first licensed issuer in the European Union for stable tokens following the rollout of the Markets in Crypto Asset Regulation Framework known as MiCA. So if I understand the nuance correctly, it's not that the USDC token or their offering is legitimized by this positioning. It's the actual firm itself as the issuer is the one that's now in compliance with MiCA, and they were first to do so. Of course, that took plenty of time to line that up long before the 6/30 date when this rolled over and came online. But they were first at the table there, and we'll see where all of that goes. So again, if anyone else has any news that I missed that they thought would be salient to bring up this morning, happy to hear it. And if I missed anything, Commissioner Navas, do feel free to tag in as well.
Any questions to add?
I was, thank you, Chrissy. I was just going to make a comment that not related necessarily to issuing of digital assets, but just the banking system overall. And Jeff will welcome your comments there. You know, we're seeing what is happening with the bankruptcy of this fintech company called Synapse and the impact that this is having in the fintech industry overall, right? The attention that now regulators are having to companies that operate as BaaS, which is banking as a service, or any other type of services to banks to provide, you know, financial services to clients. So vendors of banks are also being impacted. Something just to be mindful about, that potentially new regulation will be issued in the wake of this failure and could drive even further scrutiny into the issuing of digital assets, you know, more broadly. So just something to be attentive to. There's nothing right now that is being proposed that would impact our project per se. But anytime that the fintech industry has an impact due to one of its participants, you know, failing, there is usually a response from regulators that could potentially be something that we need to be watching. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Madam Chairman, through the chair, Flavia, would this proposed legislation, in your opinion, again, should we see it come to fruition, is that meant to plug some of the perceived gaps in who is regulating, which agency would regulate which functions? Because as far as I understand the situation, there's been a bit of finger pointing between who should be in charge of facilitating the Synapse receivership, the knock-on impacts to Evolve. It seems to be a bit of a cluster, for lack of a better term. And I'm just curious for your opinion, if you wouldn't mind providing it, of how that may shake out.
What is likely is that there's going to be additional scrutiny of these vendors at the federal level. Many of these vendors are licensed at the state level by different banking departments for different services that they provide, or they may not be regulated at all. You may see now the federal government stepping in and saying, we're going to have the Fed, the OCC, the FDIC, whatever agency be also a regulator for these providers. It's still something to be developed. Is usually a response that you see when there is a large failure like Synapse is, and what is actually being discovered, you know, by the trustee through the process and the failures that that vendor had. So it's something to think about. What that also does is increase the level of risk, well, diminishes the level of risk and increases the level of attention that banks have to its clients and the vendors that it lets on board. So as the commission starts looking at banking providers to be able to hold the reserves and manage these reserves, there could be an increase of, you know, questions and just the due diligence that is done by the banking partners in working with us, and potentially diminishment of the risk acceptance or the appetite that they would have. So this happens quite often whenever there is a failure. We've seen this over and over again. This is nothing new, but Synapse is the most recent one. And obviously, one of the discoveries that the trustee has made is obviously the complete lack of controls and the commingling of funds that were happening by the entities and how the funds were being moved, and the record keeping was deficient as well. So there could be an additional due diligence implemented by these banks as we look to work with them for our project.
Through the chair. Thank you, Commissioner Navas. That is very helpful.
Any other questions, comments on the industry update? Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Moving into our next topic here, which is recruitment. So again, we discussed in the last meeting that we now have all of our positions listed on the state's NeoGov website. We talked a little bit about traction. I've given you a sheet, a little kind of cheat sheet here with the positions and the number of applications we've received, as well as, less importantly, the views on each. And whatever is to the right of this sheet, you can kind of ignore. Commissioner Navas, this is the, I believe it's NeoGov applicant tracker on Drive. You'll see that there's some metrics here about predicted, targeted, deficit, we're over a limit or we're on target. Those are just contrivances that NeoGov has pushed forward itself. The net here is the number of applications per role. And we've received over, I think it's 117 applications across the 4 positions so far. So one of the things I've started doing is digging into all of those. I was hoping to come with kind of a full swath of analysis across all 4 roles. That has not quite happened yet, because when you pull the documentation out of NeoGov based on how long these data entry forms are, plus resumes, plus cover letters, it's over 1,000 pages of documentation. So that is all on our shared Drive file for your own perusal and enjoyment. What I've given you right now is just an example of the tracker setup for the Senior Business Project Manager. So you can see how I'm intending to move forward on these positions based on the hiring policy that was approved by the commission at our last discussion. So you'll see that there are names and email addresses, domiciles here, because for the project manager, we are looking for someone in Wyoming. Their LinkedIn info when they applied, and then my determination, again, as I'm able to do through the hiring policy, of whether we'd move forward with a screening interview, followed by a formal interview by myself or maybe one other, my designee. And then after we go through kind of that first round interview, the goal would be to have a evaluation committee formed for the explicit purpose of interviewing a very finite pool of candidates. And again, as a reminder from the work we did with the hiring policy, the expectation is we're not going to have more than 3 commissioners on any of those evaluation committees. So that would create a quorum. We have to do a public notice, have a public meeting. So the goal would be to have some combination of myself, commissioners, and potentially subject matter advisors if we need things like deep technical knowledge for the CISO role. It's also possible that we could have an optional commission interview, similar to the one that I received on my way in last year. Should we feel that there is a certain robustness to a given role, the commission does have that opportunity to say, we believe the risk and compliance officer is going to be extremely critical to the work we're doing. We want to have a formal sit down with that potential resource. We certainly have the ability to do that at the behest of the commission. The way that would manifest would be through either a executive session in an existing meeting, or we could call a special meeting for the explicit purpose of doing that interview. And then once we start that meeting up, enter into an executive session and host the interview. So you've got an idea of how I'm structuring this. You see my notes on here as well. Again, high level for the time being, but as part of that policy, I do have to document why we may pass on certain candidates, and you can see that here. And I think that's pretty much the extent of what I wanted to share. And then again, hopefully within the coming days, I'll have the full swath for all 4 positions, and even get some meetings on the calendar to have these screening interviews or formal first round interviews and go from there. But of course, happy to answer any questions before we move on from the hiring, the recruitment discussion rather.
Well, that sounds thoroughly overwhelming.
So Anthony, I would recommend, and to Chrissy's point, looking at the, online at the number of pages, this is quite extensive. And understanding that there are 24 hours in the day, you have 2 arms and 1 head only. And at one point in time, you need to sleep and eat. I would recommend that you potentially select some of the commissioners to work with you in support of this fine-tuning work. Obviously, we have a breadth of expertise that is very varied within our commission, and that some of us may be best suited to help with some of these roles than others. I, for example, will be happy to help you with the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer review to further narrow down and to present to the further commissioners. And I'm going to invite my fellow commissioners to decide whether they will be available and to help with this as well. But it's quite extensive. Looking at the compliance officer role here, there are 403 pages of documents to review. So in order to keep this expedient and ensure that we move through this review process quickly, I would recommend that you work with the commissioners to support you through this.
Through the chair, Commissioner Navas, happy to tag you in. I would say, Commissioner Pope, that was maybe a bit of a misfire to talk about how many accountants we have on the commission when we have a CFO role to review with several hundred pages of documentation. So if you want to split it up 3 ways, then by all means.
Yeah, Commissioner Navas, I think that's a great idea, and I haven't looked at these a lot, but typically you can knock out quite a few fairly quickly, and then it becomes, more, not tedious isn't the right word, but it's easy to do the first pass, and then it becomes more intense. So I think that's a great idea. I mean, Anthony, do you just want to reach out individually and say, gosh, I mean, I know, I'm certainly happy to help with the CFO. I am not the right person probably to assist with any of the others, but yeah, I think however we can help you in this, I think we're all willing to do so.
Madam Chairman, happy to tag everybody in on kind of an ad hoc basis as we can based on everyone's availability and timing.
Yeah, I don't know that it's useful to say everybody go look at everything, because I think that just overcomplicates matters, but
Madam Chair.
go ahead.
Director Apollo, certainly the CFO role, you'll probably have each of us looking at 4 or something like that. I'm happy to help on that. Also, the senior business project manager, I'm happy to help with. The other 2, I would not be as helpful.
Joel can do those.
Madam Chairman, I'm glad he's here to represent himself to take on that. Yes, take on that role.
I was thinking Commissioner Wallace would love to do all of these, I think.
Well, I was just waiting for the other CPAs to finish volunteering. Because, yeah, as Chairman Racinas is speaking, my expertise certainly isn't in information securities and maybe some risk and compliance as far as banking goes, but I think this kind of goes beyond a typical bank compliance officer too. But so I'm willing to help wherever you need me, but I'm not sure. So my expertise would really provide a lot.
And through the chair, again, I'll reiterate, we do have the ability to tag in subject matter advisors to the extent that they have signed our code of conduct and are in the mix on the working groups and subcommittees and all of that. So that's certainly an opportunity as well. We'd actually expect that to be part of, the CISO position. We'd expect that to be part of the formal interview process to make sure we've got someone with deep technical expertise, even beyond what we have here in the commission to really evaluate someone's chutzpah, we'll say, in that particular role.
Okay, great. So I think that we are all ready and willing to be as helpful as we're able, but you have to tell us to do so. and we'll get in there and start looking.
Madam Chairman, can do.
Okay.
So with that being said, I want to stick within the recruitment bucket here for just another few moments. This should go pretty quick, but I want to revisit the hiring policy that was approved in our last discussion to make a couple small tactical tweaks. So what you have in front of you, and this is the bundle that is paper clipped together. You've got 4 different packet, forms here. At the top should be the clean version of version 1.0. This is the version that was approved as amended during our last discussion. And if you go to the next page, you'll see the track changes version. And this is where we've made a couple of edits following Treasurer Meyer's suggestions around adding a section at the top around confidentiality, and then adding the term preferably in several sections to give us a little bit of leeway and wiggle room as we go through this process, because we know that we'll hit a couple hurdles along the way. We'll need that flexibility. And that is the version that was approved, that is posted on our website in the agency rules and policies section. That's the version 1.0. The second swath here, version 2.0, you've again got a clean copy and a track changes copy. If you were to look at the track changes copy, you could see that I've made some changes up front, some changes in the back. So for the confidentiality section, I've made I'm going to suggest a couple of clarifying language here. So when we discussed this last month, we had a fairly high-level statement and language put in here as suggested. And we did have a bit of a dialogue about that as we were workshopping this around the Wyoming Public Records Act, its applicability to the commission, and what that means, what is a may do or a shall do. So what I've done here, based on reflecting on that conversation and wanting to be a bit more specific about how we characterize confidentiality, I've suggested we remove some of the high-level language around all information derived from this process being considered confidential, to clarifying this to say confidentiality of applicant information received by the commission shall be treated as confidential where appropriate under the Wyoming Public Records Act at WS 16.4-201 through 16.4-205, and incorporated into the Act, which is the Stable Token Act, by reference at WS 40-31-103, subsection D, Romanet 2, where it specifically calls out that we are subject to the Public Records Act. Because that was a bit of a question of whether that was, because we're instrumentality, does that apply to us? It's very specifically in statute that does apply, and I wanted to make that known here. So that's my first suggestion. And of course, this will all be left to the behest of the commission. If you turn to the last page on this form, I've added a section called onboarding that does 2 things. The second bullet point should be familiar. This is the language that was put forth to authorize the executive director to complete any forms on behalf of the commission that are required by agencies involved in the hiring or onboarding process. So if you recall, we had very similar language for the procurement rules that we approved last week, because we want to make sure that if there are certifications, notice to proceed, all of that, we don't need to wait a month for the commission to approve that, filing a simple form. The executive director has the power to accomplish that on their own. And I believe and would suggest that we do something similar here. And this language, I do believe, was also in our motion last month to give the executive director the ability to complete any forms on behalf of the commission, with A&I, the SOS, et cetera. Going up to the first bullet here, which is a bit more robust, this is where I would seek that the commission authorize the executive director to onboard interns at the executive director's discretion, with a couple of asterisks. So one is, of course, the internship would be unpaid. Second would be the internship's responsibilities are shared with the commission in writing, no less than 10 days ahead of the intern's proposed start date. The duration of the internship would be less than 6 months, and the appointment of any interns would also need to conform to the Wyoming personnel rules promulgated by the Department of Administration and Information at Chapter 2, Section 9, subsection I, and therefore must be approved by the Human Resources Division Administrator. So there's still some checks and balances here But what I'd look to do is if there are people who are willing to kind of lend a hand, who are maybe more junior than the subject matter advisor we would look for, who are interested in what we're building, who may even have experience in what we're building, we have the ability to bring them on fairly quickly to help us as we do expect to rapidly scale the offering here. So those are my suggestions for a V2 of the hiring policy, just based on reflecting on it over the last couple of weeks. And I would leave it to the commission for any feedback on that and potentially a motion to approve those amendments.
Director, I think all of these changes are reasonable and make sense. In regards to the interns, is there, I'm wondering how the interns would fit into the other sort of confidentiality, non-compete clauses that maybe that we have for the subject matter experts. And I'm just, you know, I would think that we wouldn't use interns to review applications, for example. But how to, and this may be a question for Devin, but do you or the commission need to take any protections to say, oh, if you're an intern, you also need to sign the non-disclosure? And I'm not saying it needs to go in this policy. I'm just saying that out loud as a question.
So Madam Chairman, that would be my expectation.
Okay.
So it would not quite be like the code of conduct that the subject matter advisor are expected to fill out. That very much says if you are going to help us on our subcommittees or working groups, you're not going to propose a book of work. Mm-hmm. These are, you know, interns would be students that are not representing a particular business interest. So I wouldn't expect to have that. Of course, we can if we feel that it's necessary to have those on the code of conduct. My expectation would be that we would have a type of non-disclosure. And again, if that is incorrect, I'm sure Mr. Kenny will correct me, but we've, you know, I'm aware that that is something that the state can do. Again, at the end of the day, the Public Records Act and FOIA requests are going to be the ultimate arbiter of that, but we would expect to have a NDA signed with anyone who's going to be working alongside of us. And again, this would not be, for example, this would likely not be any of the work that we're doing on the legal subcommittees where we have privileged communications or even maybe the internal controls that is also approaching kind of a privileged perspective with perhaps MHP. But this would be facilitating some of the day-to-day, because again, we do expect this to scale pretty quickly. And one of the things I'm interested in is having interns help, you know, kind of outside the remit of my work, which is fairly robust as it stands, having someone able to kind of take all the work that's been done in Wyoming around cryptocurrency, blockchain, digital assets, the broader Web3 environment, and start putting that information together in a cohesive package to better market what the state has done over the last almost decade in this industry specifically. So that would be one of the things I feel someone, you know, an intern could come on and do with minimal oversight from my perspective, wouldn't detract from what we're doing. It would be a net benefit for the state, for the agency.
And the intern.
Yeah, and the intern too, yeah. which is one of the personnel rules. Is it does specifically say that it has to be for the benefit of the intern. So you're right on the money.
Okay, so essentially to the policy that we approved last month, there is tweaks to the confidentiality policy and the addition of the intern policy and the forms authorization. Does anyone have any concerns with those changes individually or suggestions, changes, amendments? If not, I would entertain a motion. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Naves.
Thank you, Chrissy. I just had a question, Anthony. For the change around the confidentiality and the reference to the statutes, did you work with the Attorney General's office or with someone to make sure that we are referencing the proper statutes, or if there's anything else that needs to be included?
So through the chair, Commissioner Naves, not through a specific dialogue, but that is what is functionally in our statute, right? That is the Public Records Act, and that is what is referenced in the Stable Token Act.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that if there was anything else that needed to be referenced, that we did for purposes of completeness. So, and accuracy. Thank you. Nothing else, Chrissy.
Okay. If there's, I mean, we can certainly take these one by one, but if there's agreement to the suite, I would entertain a motion to approve the policy as amended, which would be version 2.0.
Madam Chair, I move the changes be accepted in bulk.
Is there support?
I would second that.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion carries. All right, and then Director, I think we're just having a check-in on where we are with all of our rulemaking.
Absolutely, Madam Chairman. So we'll keep this kind of quick. I know there's a number of links here. Those are for reference. But in the last discussion we had, we did take two motions. One was to approve the procurement rule set as drafted. And then the second was an authorization for the executive director to go ahead and pursue on both emergency rulemaking and the regular rulemaking process. So we've started with the emergency rulemaking, and actually as of late last night, this was approved through the governor's signature. This has already gone through, and let me make sure I get the steps correct here. So following the approval by the commission, I worked with the Secretary of State's office to get onboarded to their system, the Wyoming Administrative Rule System, also known as WARS, very fitting perhaps. Worked with their team to upload all of our documentation. So there's clean copies, track changes copies, and all of that. And they approved it on July 8th. That then went off to the governor, which again was signed last night. So we are now live with our emergency rules on the WARS system internally and on the public Wyoming Administrative Rules website. We do have the Wyoming State Bill Token is now there as an agency. These 5 chapters of rules are now live. And I'll also note that because these are emergency rules and we are live, that also does start the clock for us. So we do have 120 days with which to formally promulgate these rules through regular rulemaking. If we need to, we can extend 120 days, but I think for the procurement rules, we should be in pretty good shape about this. This is not a huge delta from, again, what the State Construction Department already has, and we're pretty close to that. So while we will go through the regular rulemaking process, I would expect it to be somewhat straightforward, perhaps in comparison to anything we need to pass around reserves management and the Wyoming staple token life cycle, for lack of a better term, which would be a policy around issuing and minting Wyoming staple tokens, how the redemptions work, burning, freezing, interdicting, whatever we need to do in a rule set. That will take a bit more time. So that's going to probably come back towards Q4 to get those. Well, not sure if we have till Q4, but the point is those will take a bit more time to socialize than the procurement rules did. Any questions on where we are with the rulemaking process?
Hearing none, we'll look forward to the commentary on that starts coming in, I assume, as well.
So, Madam Chairman, one of the things I mentioned, again, I'm not expecting there to be a ton of commentary on the procurement rules. I do expect there to be significant, potentially, commentary on the Wyoming staple token rules. Even for the reserves management, I wouldn't expect there will be some. I don't expect much of a logjam there, because for that rule set, we could probably be a bit more lightweight from our perspective, because we already have defined in statute the limitations of our portfolio. So cash, U.S. Treasury securities with a year or less to maturity, U.S. Treasury security repurchase agreements 30 days or less to maturity. So that's already carved out. And that's fairly conservative, in line with other guidance. We may be able to pepper in some of the guidance and lessons learned from New York DFS, from their stable token guidance, from some of the proposed federal legislation and how they've handled things. For example, we've had discussions around how long redemptions take for cash to settle. That might be part of all of this. But that shouldn't be too much of a delta from what already exists. The work we would do around the actual token rules would be functionally net new. And I think that's why we need to spend a lot of time in that working group, particularly to get a really robust and ironclad set of rules completed internally before we push anything live for the 45-day public comment period.
Madam Chair,
Go for it.
one of the reasons that those become really almost really, there will be a lot of commentary, mainly because we've got a lot of people to satisfy with those. You've got the audit requirements, the treasurer's office requirements, you've got privacy concerns by individuals, you've got just a whole host of folks who are incentivized or very interested in those particular aspects of it. So I think that'll be an interesting lift. And will we assume, or am I to assume we will be making emergency rules on those first and then move to that, to the formal process?
So through the chair, Commissioner Pope, I think for those, we would be hard pressed to get emergency rules through, solely for the fact that this is to a certain extent world's first work. And we're gonna need some, I think the gut feel is we'll need eyes on things before we push them live. That's my own personal opinion. Of course, that'll be up to the commission, the other agencies involved, and the governor at the end of the day. But my gut feel and some of the conversations we've had to date around this would indicate that that would need to go through the formal process.
That makes sense, and I mean, there's some, it's somewhat nebulous, but you have to meet a certain bar to, you have to have a reason, you have to have a real emergency, meaning, you know, you have to justify your emergency, I guess. And so we've certainly seen this coming. It's just a very big lift, as you said. Okay.
If there's no other questions, I'll move on to the next steps here, and we'll kind of start winding down. Again, we've only had a few weeks since our last discussion, including 2 days of select committee and the July 4th holiday, so we'll keep it quick. So in terms of the focus for the next meeting, which will take place on August 15th, one of the quicker items should be an update to the spending authority policy. In that capacity, we have essentially 10x'd the budget we have. I'm not saying we're going to 10x the limitations for the director or whoever needs to make, you know, whatever transactions, but we should consider increasing the monthly spend and allotment for software as a service platforms. As we grow the team, we're going to have more people who need access to certain platforms. Perhaps we need to increase some of the reimbursements around travel. If commissioners are going to start traveling more often to start doing some of the marketing around the stable token, which is the point that Commissioner Reville, I think, astutely made in the last conversation. We need to be getting a bit louder about this, and that could, one of the downstream effects of showing up at conferences is there's more spend. So I expect to have an update to that document in the next discussion. I may socialize some of those numbers ahead of time to make sure everyone's kind of comfortable with it, so we don't show up with any kind of question marks or asterisks on numbers that may be too big. But I think that is one of the things we'll cover off on. And then the much more robust piece of work, which is going to be my main focus for the next 30 days, is the vendor pre-qualification surveys. So again, to reiterate, we have the ability statutorily following the budget session to do our own procurements. We've now passed the emergency rules, those hit last night. So now we can go forward with the actual procurement process. The expectation is we will be doing requests for proposals to interview, assess, and engage vendors. Upstream of the RFP process will be a pre-qualification process where we define what we need to these external third parties. Again, that could be one organization, but more likely a consortium of organizations, and say, if you're going to be working with the state of Wyoming, we need a certain robustness around the offering that we're developing. We're going to need to know that you've done X number of transactions with your platform, process X billion dollars of transaction volume, you've got these security features, you've got these many people registered on your platform, what have you. That'll manifest differently for different RFPs that we're going to eventually look at downstream of those prequals. But the goal here is to make those fairly robust documents and really tighten the funnel on the caliber of vendor we're going to want to work with as we move forward. Any questions?
Anthony, I guess I'm curious where, if our business plan is still being developed, and where does that fall into some of these steps here? Because I guess in my mind, I'd feel more comfortable if I had a better idea of what our business plan's looking like as we're going into the pre-qualification and the RFPs and that sort of thing.
And that's, through the chair, a very astute question. You know, my personal perspective, and this is not enumerated in this agenda, nor did I just say it, so I don't know how you would know. But my take is the business plan would feed into that pre-qual, because for the pre-qualifications, we're going to need to say this is what we want to build. That's going to need to fit into the business plan. And I will say, I do believe we talked about this in the prior days, but we are looking to step up the marketing effort pretty significantly over the coming month. And that is going to require us to have a better enumerated use case, target audience. These are all things, conversations we've had along the way, but putting that all on paper will manifest in the business plan as well as the pre-quals.
So it feels like we've taken a little bit of a, not a break, that's taken a little bit of a backseat as we've got a lot of administrative stuff done and the legislation passed and these more utilitarian things. And so it'll be time to sort of pick that back up and refine it maybe.
Madam Chairman, I would agree with that statement. I think we're in a great place now with the procurement rules passed that we can be a bit louder about what it is we're looking to build and go build it.
Madam Chair. And I also believe that getting the CFO hired is extraordinarily important in that aspect of it too, with the business plan, because they will be forecasting, part of their job will be the forecasting of the numbers and all of that. Like I did a quick calculation just to pay back the state of Wyoming. We're going to have to average $201 million in deposits over the course of an entire year at historic averages for treasuries. Yeah, that's, well, my apologies, $201 in sales and funds and treasuries that we are holding. We'll have to have $201 million averaged over the course of the year. And that's taken historic averages on the treasuries. So, you know, that in itself, in order to build to that point, in order to forecast what the what earnings will be on that, I think it's going to require a pretty deep analysis, and I think a CFO will be great because that's one of the things they will be tasked with. I'm guessing, Director Apollo, please tell me if I'm wrong.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, I think that's quite accurate. I think the one thing and the nuance I would add on that is, while we are in an environment with historic highs on treasuries, the expectation is of those dollars that are going to be coming in, some of those will be shared with our vendors through partnerships. We do expect there to be revenue sharing agreements. And then potentially for any large institution that wants to circulate X number of Wyoming stable tokens, we consider them to be an institutional partner. They may function, in our business plan, we call them a licensed service provider, or colloquially a reseller. They may function quite similarly to market makers, right? Which would also be perhaps receiving some percentage of revenues as a revenue share. So that'll be one of the other complexities of doing this modeling, as will the interest rate itself. You know, we went into the beginning of this year hearing rates were going to be cut 4 times over the course of this year, and I'm still waiting, so.
Madam Chair, one follow-up. And Commissioner Wallace, when I speak of deposits, yes, in a very tertiary level, that you may have interpreted that as customer deposits, but we have to have deposits in a bank and for redemptions, and we have to have deposits in an institution that owns treasuries. So there does need to be a dividing line. There is some traditional banking language that we will use, but it's on our part, not on our customer's part. So
Thank you for that.
you're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will proceed quickly, especially because my computer has died, so if that causes you any complexities, apologies. It was fully charged on the way in here, so I'll quickly just say, we talked the next meeting, I would say downstream of that, in our September meeting, we would expect to have the vendor pre-qualifications done, then move formally to the RFPs for that. And then in terms of upcoming meetings and events, we were ready to discuss that our next meeting will be here, same time, same place, on August 15th. And then we've got 2 events coming up. One is the Wyoming Blockchain Symposium. I think some formal announcements will be made soon regarding that event. That's in Jackson from August 19th through 22nd. And we do expect to have a bit of a presence there. It is an event very much focused on the work Wyoming is doing in this industry. And as such, we'll be there. And then we also have the annual Wyoming Blockchain Stampede. I believe this is the 7th annual Stampede. So congratulations to the university for keeping things going. That will take place from September 16th through 20th. The first 2 days of that will be the select committee. We'll take that Thursday, the 19th, will be our meeting in Laramie to take part in the festivities. So just wanted to get those on the schedule because they're coming up sooner and sooner every day. And with that being said, Madam Chairman, that is it from my side. And I would certainly welcome any questions the commissioners may have. But other than that, we can enter public comment.
Any further questions for the director?
Flavia.
I have a question. Yeah, thank you guys. So Anthony, as we start the procurement process, I know that the commission had discussed previously the creation of subcommittees to support not only the development of the procurement for each one of these sections, but also to ensure that we're getting feedback by industry experts. When do you anticipate getting the subcommittees together and working?
Through the chair, Commissioner Naves, there is an 8-hour block on my calendar for Tuesday next week to make sure that's all squared away.
Thank you, Anthony.
Right after he reads the 1,100 pages of applications.
Exactly.
Through the
Yes.
chair, that is Monday's 8-hour block for lots of reading.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your work, Anthony. And I think, I know that getting these people on is a huge amount of work. And I know once they come on, that'll be a huge amount of work. But then hopefully as you're able to spread some of the love, anyway, hopefully it gets better.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And one comment that I'll quickly make that I don't think I've made along the way while discussing some of the recruitment is, as these applications have been coming in, obviously there's a large volume of them, but I have been keeping track of some of the names and some of the resumes that are coming in. And I won't say much here, but I will certainly say there are people who are interested in this project with deep experience, technical experience, the roles we're looking for, who are as excited potentially about these roles as we are. And I think we're right on the money with that. It's a testament to the work that this commission has done and the legislature has done as well in this space.
Great. Okay, with that, I would ask for public comment. We typically limit that to 3 minutes per speaking party. I'll ask first, is there anyone here in the room? Hearing none. Brian, do we have anyone online?
No, ma'am. As of now, we have no one online.
Okay, one last call. All right, with that, we have reached the end of our agenda. I would note that the average meeting when I'm in the chair is shorter than the average meeting with the governor. I'm kidding. I think that's just my luck.
Madam Chairman, I think it's a bit of a setup knowing full well that we're going to be going through pre-qualifications with several dozen questions on them next month. Might be a bit of a setup there.
Madam Chair, I wholeheartedly agree. Accountants are awesome.
All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there support?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.